The 101st General Assembly is sworn in, and Governor Pritzker takes over this week. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Charlie Wheeler is here with me today, back again. He is Director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield. Before his long tenure in that, he was a long-tenured State House reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. Welcome back, Charlie.
Thank you, Bernie. It's always fun to be here.
And Hannah Meisel is here. She is State House reporter for The Daily Line. Welcome back, Hannah.
Glad to be back.
Okay, we have witnessed this week, well, something new and something old, but Mike Madigan is again Speaker of the House. Hannah, I know you attended that. We were able to witness that together at Sangamon Auditorium at University of Illinois Springfield, a place where the House gets sworn in every 2 years lately because there's room for all the family members. It's a big celebration. And Mike Madigan was elected overwhelmingly, but not totally. How'd things go?
Well, first, I'd like to talk about his interesting choice of how he started his speech. And he looked not forward, but backward to January 14th, 2014, when he was, of course, again, reelected Speaker and pledged to work together with Bruce Rauner. And he said, since then, it's been 4 long years of character assassination, personal vilification, and getting ultimatums, and having the governor say, my way or the highway. And I just thought it was very interesting that you would choose, but it's not that surprising. Like after the election, the day after the election, he issued this 4-page post-election memo, and it seemed like an unloading of all of his feelings about the years of Rauner running ads against him, like in a non-election year. We saw that in 2017, or just, saying the speaker's name so many times, like lots of Republicans have begun to doubt the efficacy of, that line of attack.
Of attacking Mike Madigan.
But
right.
So I just thought that was interesting. And yes, the speaker was again reelected speaker. I thought it was kind of funny that Lisa Madigan, outgoing Attorney General, and also the speaker's daughter, swore him in and said, "Congratulations, you're the speaker." Again.
That's right.
So, but yes, almost total vote for him as speaker. But of course, the very progressive Democrat from Naperville and Stava-Murray, who won pretty unexpectedly her race. As expected, she threatened to not vote for the speaker for the speakership, and she followed through with that promise. She told reporters afterward, it felt good to do that. I was smiling.
Right, she voted present.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, all the Republicans voted for Jim Durkin,
right,
as is usual, the minority leader. Although with the new House, Charlie, we've got 74 Democrats, which is more than an extraordinary majority. And only 44 Republicans. So how does this change kind of the way things are looking?
Well, I'm hopeful that what it will indicate, as both the Democratic leaders, both Madigan and Senate President John Cullerton, and the Republican leaders, Jim Durkin in the House, Bill Brady in the Senate, all talked about working together, finding common ground, understanding that there'll be areas on which they have philosophical differences, but in general, they're going to try and move the state forward and kind of forget about the past 4 years as kind of an Illinois nightmare. And I think it's safe to predict that we will have a budget on time. We won't have another budget impasse. And I think Pritzker has shown himself to be someone who's anxious to cross the aisle and to work with both sides. If I'm not mistaken, you maybe were there, he showed up at one of the Republican receptions, right?
I wasn't, but I read and saw about it, yes.
Yeah, and so this, to me, is a sign of his willingness to listen to all sides, work with all sides. Yeah, he's got an agenda. He's got things that he believes in. Republicans will disagree, but there's a lot of room for compromise. And you alluded earlier to I had this long career at the Sun-Times. Well, and in fact, I did, 24 years. And almost all of that time, we had Republican governors, and the Republican governors dealt with Democratic majorities in the Senate. For a good share of that time, Mike Madigan was the Speaker, but he was able to work with those Republican governors. And so I don't see why Pritzker can't follow that same kind of a pattern where you work with people on the other side of the aisle to find things on which you can agree to try and move the ball forward.
Right. And Hannah, as you know, and I know you talked about what Speaker Madigan said about the past, but he also looked forward,
He did.
saying he hopes it's a new era of cooperation, as it was with past governors, like Charlie was just saying.
Oh yeah, and I spoke with Jim Durkin on sometime this week, and he genuinely seems just really upbeat. He and Rauner did not get along. It was a really hard road for both of them, and Durkin seems like his caucus will be okay, and the Speaker.
And even though the Republicans he leads, there's only 44 of them, so they have more of a minority, or fewer people than they had last time. But he and Bill Brady, the Senate Republican leader, had dinner at Pritzker's home in Chicago by invitation of the governor-elect. So they seem to be trying to say they'll work together.
Yeah, and I think the Speaker, he has definitely learned some lessons. The budget impasse caused a lot more cracks to show, I would say, within his own party, and just the national political conversation we've been having we are seeing more progressive Democrats, for example. And so that will be a new challenge for him to manage. But I think that it seems like he will let them have some wins. The Speaker himself, he's mostly just interested in power. He doesn't necessarily have deep-held, beliefs about policy positions.
Well, he believes in labor, but he believes
yes.
in electing Democrats also.
right.
To keep him there.
And so I think that he will let the progressives have some wins and work together with the governor. The governor has a very ambitious agenda, but the governor also seems to be genuinely interested in working across the aisle.
Yeah. Speaking of across the aisle, President Cullerton remains Senate president. He talked about taking over, I guess, when Rod Blagojevich was just going to become impeached, which was one of the first actions 10 years ago. Things have come a long way. I know in Cullerton's speech, he said the people back home have no tolerance for impasses and infighting. They want us to get things done. Governor Rauner, who has fought tooth and nail with the legislature over the last few years, although he was always seemed to have the meanest words for Speaker Madigan and seemed to use Cullerton. Oh, he could get along with me if only Madigan weren't there. But President Cullerton was nice to the governor in his speech, just saying thanks for your service. I hope your family does well. Charlie, President Cullerton moving on with I guess it's a 40-19 Democratic advantage now. Where does he go and where does the state go under such strong Democratic rule that we're going to see now with a Democratic governor, all the elected officials that are going to be inaugurated, the constitutional officers on Monday, and these giant majorities in the House and Senate?
Well, as I said earlier, I expect that we're going to be able to get some things done. My guess is one of the earliest programs that will reach the governor's desk will be some kind of a public works program. We haven't had one now in 10 years. And anybody who's driven on our roads and highways knows that there's need for some improvement in those areas. And so I think that's a plan on which members on both sides of the aisle can come behind. The governor will be for. He's talked about the need for that. He's talked about raising the minimum wage. And as a matter of fact, the very first bill introduced in the Senate is one that it's what's called a vehicle bill. It doesn't really have any substantive, but it makes a change in the minimum wage law. So that's obviously, or I think obviously, is going to be the vehicle on which they will try and put through a plan to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Right, although Governor-elect JB Pritzker has said that will be phased in. It won't be like an immediate hit, so maybe over a few years.
And he's also talked about trying to provide some type of relief, maybe through income tax credits or something like that for small businesses, so that the impact isn't that detrimental to them.
Right.
But the argument is you pay people more, they spend more, and it's good for the economy.
One of the things that we've been talking about, the apparent view of good faith between parties right now, even as the Democrats take over and the Republicans know they're in a minority but need to work with them. Lawmakers just before, in the lame duck session just before the swearing in this week, passed, I think, 2 measures. One, to allow higher pay for incoming agency directors, because Governor-elect Pritzker has said that he needs to be able to pay more money to some people than, I think it was about $150,000 top pay, and he needed more than that to get people to run, for example, the technology department for the state and things like that. And the Republicans, despite the fact that it's more spending for a new Democratic governor, went along with that. Governor Rauner had wanted something like that, and I believe did not get it from the legislature. And there's also a reconstitution of the Illinois Toll Highway Authority that runs the tollways up in the Chicago area, because there have been some allegations of contract irregularities and hiring irregularities or patronage stuff, so that Pritzker is going to be able to appoint a new board. I think that also went through. So it just showed good faith at this point.
Yeah.
So I mean, one of Rauner's biggest complaints was attracting talent to the state and, you know, paying them. If you are one of these like top level executives in the private sector, you're going to be paid way more than you would ever be paid, even at the top levels of state government. And so you, of course, you know, you want to sell people on, you know, it's going to be a great resume builder, you know, it could leave a lasting legacy, blah, blah, blah. But you also want it to be worth their time. And I guess there's this state law that says, or in the Constitution, I'm not quite sure.
No, it's a law.
Oh, okay. That says, you know, you can't pay, no one can be paid more than the governor, and the governor earns $172,000 a year.
I think is it 85% of the governor's salary?
Not sure.
Something like that. But there is, like you said, there is a
but
cap
there's
on
a
it.
limit, and that's what's just been raised. So.
Right. And so, I mean,
and of course, this last governor and I think the new one are not getting paid for it because they have enough money of their own. And
well, I mean, like they have to get paid, but like they give it back or whatever. And so the Democrats were pushing this bill, and again, like it's not very contentious. Although we did see in the Senate there was not as many yes votes as they might have liked, but the Democrats pushing it said, look, like it's only $700,000 more. You know, if all 49 of the positions eligible were to get this 15% bump. So, yes, does it have the appearance? You know, if you look at it from one angle of, you know, trying to bump salaries of do-nothing agency heads, whatever. Yes, sure. But it is, you know, I think lots of people who are in state government and observe it would agree that you do need to attract top talent.
Sometimes, you know, it's a sacrifice to come work for the state, is what, you know,
Well,
versus the private sector.
If you think about it, some of these positions, it's definitely a sacrifice, even with the bump.
Well,
we
the
have
new
this
director,
Department of Innovation and Technology, I believe it's called, Do It.
Right.
And it has the goal of trying to restructure the whole state's computer systems and accounting systems to bring in the latest innovations, to bring us into the 21st century from the late 19th. And the people who are able to do this are probably making in the millions in private industry. So they're going to take a cut anyway. Or you look at a department like the Department of Healthcare and Family Services, which is a budget that probably overall approaches $20 billion. How many executives in the private sector managing $20 billion corporations get paid $150,000?
Right. Although we did just, in a new announcements from the Pritzker transition, Teresa Eagleson will serve as Director of Healthcare and Family Services, and she currently serves as Executive Director of the Office of Medicaid Innovation at the University of Illinois System. So she's already in public service, so probably not going to have that big a difference. But that was, and among the transition's been rolling along, naming some folks, So we'll see what happens. I wanted to mention, we talked briefly about Ann Stava-Murray, who voted present, the woman from Naperville, and she has already said that because so many people within the Democratic caucus talked to her negatively, and she calls it like harassment or calls that she thought were taking her on, and one of the members kissed her on top of the head at an event, and she thought that was the incorrect thing to do, and was making that public. She says she already realizes that she is only going to serve 2 years in the House, and has already said she's going to run against Dick Durbin, the United States Senator, who has confirmed on a recent CNN interview that he will be running for another term in 2020. Charlie, any thoughts on this?
I think if you look back historically, there are some members, and her point is well taken, there are some members that get along less well with the others than some of their colleagues. I know in my day there were certain people who could pass any legislation at all just because they were so popular with their colleagues. And people would do it for good old Joe, even though, this bill kind of stinks, but Joe wants it, and he's a good guy. And there are other people who couldn't pass anything to save their life. And sometimes what they would do is they would have Joe sponsor their bill. And maybe that's what the new representative intends to do.
And she's actually talked about that I'm going to have, if I have good legislation, I'll find somebody, because I know they won't pass mine because I've spoken out against the speaker.
Yeah,
but she's also she's new and green at this. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and you can't expect somebody who just comes in to have the institutional knowledge. She may be, and I don't know her background that well, she may be the world's foremost expert in one little slice. But on the other hand, the legislature deals with everything from A to Z. There's nobody there who knows everything. And so you rely on your colleagues. Some people, back in my day, some people were experts on pensions, some people were experts on education, some people were experts on the revenue structure. Those would be the go-to people on these issues. And so she will find people who will back her ideas, and if they've been around longer and have more of a sense of how the process works, they'll be able to help her move her ideas along. But I don't think she's going to be boycotted. That doesn't make any sense.
No, I was talking to a Democrat yesterday, and this person, I was trying to understand what happened with Scott Drury, who was the Democratic legislator from Highwood. He came in also, voted president on Madigan for speakership, and he was very anti-Madigan, and as a result, did not, was not very popular with his colleagues. But it wasn't just that he was anti-Madigan. It's personalities. Like the whole state house is built on relationships and personalities. And at the end of the day, we're all people, and so we want to be around people that you like and get along with. And so Stava-Murray is interpreting all this to be about the speaker, and she fears that she's going to be ostracized. But this Democrat was like, you ostracize yourself when you come in with an attitude of I know better, and her ideals and ideas might not be wrong.
She's very progressive.
She's very progressive.
She said she agrees with Pritzker on a lot of things, including the progressive income tax.
But it's going to be hard for her if she does this. And there's also a tradition for freshman lawmakers when they have their first bill on the floor for final vote, that people tend to screw with you and they'll ask
razz you a bit.
Yes, and
we'll see how
I wonder
how
that goes with her.
We should say Governor Rauner had a news conference this week. It was to discuss the fact that he was going to be issuing a end of his term report to the legislature. He basically talked up education as an accomplishment and handed out copies of his turnaround agenda, saying this is still what the people want. Said he was worried for the state if the Democrats come in and raise taxes. He sounded a lot, Charlie, like the Governor Rauner of 2014 instead of the one who got beat by 15 points in 2018.
Yeah, and I found it interesting because one of the things that he didn't mention, or at least was not in the stories I read, and I have to admit I have not read the full thing yet, was the progress in criminal justice.
Yes.
And we've had great progress there, and it's been a bipartisan effort to bring down the number of people who are incarcerated.
We worked with Democrats on that very well.
Yeah, and we're down below 40,000 now, according to the Department of Corrections, which, 8 or 10 years ago, we were at 47,000. So that's good. But he highlighted things like the education. He can take credit for the tuition tax credit bill. Some people don't think that's a good idea, others do.
Yeah,
but that would not be there were it not for his insistence that that be part of the final
right.
bargain.
This is the foundation that allows people to get scholarships to go to private schools and get a tax break for donating to
I
that.
shortened it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so that's one that not everybody would agree on. And for example, he talked about the Janus decision, that he helped orchestrate a case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court that said that you can't be required to pay your fair share of the costs of collective bargaining to the union if you don't want to.
Right.
Now, I'm a union guy, as everybody who's ever heard me talk about knows.
Yeah,
So
he
I
calls
would
it forced union dues, you call it fair share. So,
yeah, and
right.
so I would look at that as a black mark on his administration.
But it did change law nationwide, and he helped do that through the courts as opposed to through the legislature.
From my perspective, it changed it in the wrong way. So
Understood.
it is something that he accomplished. As a side, had it not been for Mitch McConnell, he would never had the opportunity, because had Mayor Garland been placed on the Supreme Court as President Obama wanted, the court's complexion would have been different when that case came before him, and chances are that the law that had existed up to that point would have remained intact.
Correct. Speaking of the national situation, I just want to mention the national shutdown, partial shutdown of the federal government is still going on as we speak. The Lincoln Home is a national park system facility. People can still walk around the Lincoln Home but can't go in it to tour it. There has been, as we tape this, an offer from the state-run Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum to open and run that home. I'm not sure where that has gone yet, but we were coming. It's the end of the week, coming on the time that federal employees aren't getting paid. So we'll see where that goes and what it means. I don't know if it affects much in state government as we go on, but obviously what happens at the federal level with the shutdown with 800,000 employees will have an impact over time.
Yeah, and it does in Illinois, because we have federal workers who live in Illinois who are not going to be paid, who are faced with mortgage payments, they're faced with car payments, they're faced with tuition payments if they have outstanding tuition debt from when they went to college, and they're really going to be scrambling.
We also, here in Springfield, most of our viewers have probably been to the Lincoln Home at least once, twice, 10 times. And it really does bring a lot of tourists. I'm always surprised, especially in the summer, how many tourists come to Springfield, which means that they, get on a plane and then drive either 2 hours from St. Louis or 3 hours from Chicago. But
and Springfield does have an airport.
It does, but it's,
yes.
Connecting flights are hard and expensive. So, but, on a more serious note, also, there's food stamps that are going to be affected by the shutdown. There's, possibly Medicaid, if that, I'm not exactly sure how those payments are made to the state or states in general, but there are a lot of consequences, and just, it reminds me of, the beginning of the budget impasse here in Illinois, when there's this philosophical discussion of if you can't feel the shutdown, is the government actually shut down? If it's running, if people are going to work, if you can't feel the pain.
Right, but I think the difference here is the state in Illinois, the courts said state employees should still get paid.
Yes.
And that allowed the shutdown to go on for 2 years. At the federal level, if those employees don't get paid and they don't go to work, at least the half of them who are considered non-essential, I think that will not allow it to go on for 2 years, although we'll see what happens. We only have a few minutes left, but I did want to get into some changes, including what are now a couple of former legislators. One is Lou Lang, who has been a leader of Democrats in the House. He's from Skokie. He was in almost 30 years. He just announced his resignation this last week, said he's going into lobbying. He did get accused by a woman of touching her back inappropriately at some meeting about lobbying an issue. The Inspector General found he had done nothing out of bounds. He vehemently denied any problem, but he did lose his leadership job at that time. So he's now stepped down, and he's joined a lobbying firm with Nancy Kimmey, who used to be chief of staff to Judy Bartopinka. She also was known to be close to the Rauner administration as people are being hired there. So it's just an interesting transition, and the revolving door goes on, Charlie.
Oh, yeah, and if you were to look at the lobbyist list, you'd see any number of lobbying firms that involve former lawmakers from both sides of the aisle who have the, I guess, the entree to the Republicans and to the Democrats because they're their former colleagues who can represent their clients' views more effectively than somebody walking in from the street.
Right, and Lou Lang, clearly he knows a lot. Nancy Kimmy is well known among Republicans. Lou Lang well known among Democrats. Democrats are going to be running everything, so this isn't the first firm where there's a prominent Republican and a prominent Democrat working together. We'll see how that goes. And Mr. Lang of Skokie, who's also been a lawyer for all these years, will still be around Springfield. Nick Sauer is a sadder story, perhaps. He was a first-term legislator from Lake Barrington who about last August abruptly quit when it came out that he had posted on Facebook some apparently lewd pictures of a former girlfriend. And this last week he got indicted on 12 counts because of publishing pictures on the internet of apparently more than one woman, because another woman has come forward saying she dated him for a while, broke it off, and then found out there was a website formed. Who wants to who wants to take this, for someone as accomplished as a young, I think, legislator who had made it to Springfield? It just seems so odd. As we speak now, he's posted bond and will be facing trial and faces possibly a few years in prison for this. Charlie, what's the deal? And we have less than a minute left.
Absolute stupidity is how I would categorize it. And of course, I'm from several generations ago. I can't envision somebody like doing something like that back in the day. Of course, we didn't have the technology then, but how could you do such a thing? That's just reprehensible.
It's interesting that in the last, I can't remember when it actually passed, but it was introduced, I remember in 2014 when I started as an intern. The revenge porn bill that became a law is now the one that is indicting Nick Sauer in Lake County.
Things do move on in odd ways in Illinois, and perhaps we'll see how good things come. The inauguration of the top state officers is this week. It will be Monday. It will be a very interesting time in Illinois state government. We'll see how things go. Charlie Wheeler and Hannah Meisel, thanks for your thoughts on those things today. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.